Getting your kid into school, particularly your school of choice, can be a very stressful thing for a parent. Even more so if you're a parent that's also moving to Australia, like you don't have enough things to do. My daughter recently joined Prep, which is the earliest year group that your kid can join a school in Australia. So to help you learn from the many mistakes that we made in this process, I'm always seeming to make mistakes, this is the easiest way that you can get your kid into school in Australia. Now, whilst this guide is designed to share with you the more generic process of getting your kid into school, I'm going to give you a bit of a warning that it is quite Queensland centric, because that's where I live. And each state and territory will have slight variations on what it is that I'm about to say. So the first thing that you'll need to do is speak to your school of choice directly and see if there are any additional parts to the enrolment process. And while you're speaking to them, ask for the school enrolment management plan. And the most important part about this is that they'll tell you what the catchment area is for your school. Whilst you sometimes can get enrolments out of the catchment area, obviously the more popular ones aren't really going to provide this. So if you haven't yet decided where you're going to rent or buy a house, that might be an important step on helping you to decide where it is that you want to live. The general rule in Australia is that as long as you live within the catchment area, the school kind of has to take you. Unless of course you want your kid to go to a private school, and then as long as you've got enough money, I guess. Within the school enrolment plan, you'll also find any other specific criteria for enrolment. For example, if you want your kid to go to a religious school. And of course there are loads of forms that you need to fill in. And if you thought that you were done with all of those forms when you moved over here, they never end. You'll also find the proof of residency requirements and also the process to find out if you've been accepted. In Australia, only permanent residents and citizens are entitled to free education. So if you're on a temporary visa, there is going to be an additional cost to send your kid to school. And again, this does vary by state and territory. For example, in Queensland, if you're on a temporary visa, you could pay anywhere between $300 and $400 a week just to send your kid to school. And this is normally paid in advance. That's a good reason to try and get permanent residency if you've got kids. Of course, if you'd like your kids to go to a private school, then these prices can vary anywhere between a few thousand to 30+ thousand per year. And whilst this might seem like an expensive choice, and it is, in general I think that private schooling is a more achievable option in Australia, especially when you compare it to how much it costs in places like the UK and the US. One of the things that I'm often asked by potential migrants to Australia is whether the Australian schooling system will be able to cater for their academic child, like they're some kind of Mensa-esque savant. And the basic answer is yes. If you look at the whole Australian schooling system as a whole, of course they'll be able to cater for academic children. The only problem is if you're feeling quite entitled, chances are that school isn't going to be on your doorstep. And whilst education in Australia is generally free, obviously the house prices within the catchment areas of those schools reflects how good they are. So although you might not have to pay a lot for an education in Australia, a good education doesn't necessarily come cheap. One thing that is going to make your eyes water though is the cost of uniforms. And while some public schools might allow generic unbranded uniform from places like Kmart, Big W or Target, I'm also quite partial to a best and less. In Australia, it doesn't seem to be a thing to clothe your kid entirely from uniform from these types of shops. Pretty much all private schools and increasingly more public schools are requiring that you wear their branded uniform, which obviously isn't cheap. And to make it even worse, they have different uniforms on different days, like house colour Fridays or formal uniform Mondays, like you're dressing them up like some kind of doll. My daughter did look quite cute in her formal uniform though. So how much do uniforms cost? My daughter's formal dress was $55, and if she was a boy, she would be required to buy a shirt and a pair of shorts. Sometimes I'm glad not having boys. Her normal school polo shirt is $33, and although her house shirt does seem to have a little bit of extra colour, that also is $33. My daughter insists on skirts. I didn't even know they were a thing, but they're also $24. Then of course in Sunsafe Australia you also need a hat. Now these are quite cool because they also flip inside out and they do have your kid's house colour on it. So it seems like you're getting a good deal at 2 for 1, and they're only $16. And even in Queensland it does get cold in winter and you can't just wear a generic dark overcoat or jumper. So if she wants the branded fleecy zip up thingy, that can be anywhere between $32 and $36 depending on her size. And if her legs get cold, then she can wear one of 2 types of long pants, which vary between $20 or $30 depending on what type of material you want. What lovely choices they give us. And just in case you thought you could just put your homework or your library books back into your kid's bag, no, you need a separate bag for those as well, and they're $14 each. So all in all, the total came to about $278 for my kid's uniform and bags. But you also have to bear in mind that that's only for 4 days worth of uniform. So we're probably going to have to do a wash in the middle of the week, but that's also okay because I have a toddler who seems to make loads of mess, so we're always washing anyway. Thank God for second-hand uniform shops and Facebook Marketplace. And one thing I didn't include in all of that was her shoes, which have to be all black. And socks, which have to be all white. We just bought them from Big W for about $6, as well as her shoes, which obviously had to have princesses inside of them. Now these weren't the most expensive ones that they had there, at only $50. If she'd have wanted the Clarks ones, which it seems like all young kids have in the UK, they would have been over $100. I just hope hers lasts the year. Because if they don't, then we're just going to buy her a pair of black trainers, which in Australia they call joggers. And your kids can generally wear them to school as well, as long as they're all black. So that's all of the costs, right? Wrong! You also have to pay for books and equipment here. But it's fine, because the school lovingly provides you with a massive long itemised list. And ours came to $165.70, because we ordered early, and we picked it up. And then afterwards, of course, you have to label every single item. Now I know that you can go to places like Officeworks and give them the list and they'll give you all of the same items, but this didn't really work for us because they had some of them missing. And in total, it only really would have saved about $20. Now, if you're wondering about this price, it only really seems high because she's in prep. If she was in year 6, it would come to just less than $100. And because you've labelled all of the items, if any of them do come back and they've not been used, you can then use them for future years. I'm told though that it doesn't get cheaper when your kid gets to high school, particularly if they have a bring your own device policy and they tell you exactly what kind of device you have to have, and this can be hundreds if not thousands. So if you're thinking about moving to Australia and you are worried about the cost, I'm going to give you something for free, particularly if you haven't even thought what visa you might need yet. And if you haven't, speak to True Blue Migration Services, mention us and use their free visa assessment. Believe it or not, some companies do charge for this service, and you could end up paying as much as my kid's uniform and her equipment combined. But True Blue Migration Services provide this all for free, and there's no obligation. And they're MARA registered, so you know you can trust them. Check all the details down in the description below, and you never know, after your conversation with them, you might be sending your kid to an Australian school as well. So when do your kids start school? And as in true Australian fashion, this does vary between state and territory. The general rule is though that your kid needs to be 5 by a certain cut-off date. And I'm told that one of the few states where it actually makes sense is Tasmania, where their cut-off date kind of coincides with the school year, and everyone else just seems to plonk it randomly in the middle. Why can't they just make it easy? Although saying this, these are only the guidelines of the minimum age that you can send your kid to school. If you decide that your kid is a little bit too young, then you can choose to defer them a year. Or I have known of kids that have gone to prep and then chosen to repeat a year. So whilst the minimum age is 5, the general rule seems to be when you feel like your kid is old enough for school, or when you're fed up of paying for daycare fees. Now, if you're not sure specifically for your kid, or perhaps you've got an older kid and you want to know what year they would be in an Australian school, I have put a link down in the description for a school year calculator. Just make sure you watch till the end of the video before you check it out, obviously. So here are some random facts about schools in Australia. School years generally run from January to December, and again, the start and end date does vary on state and territory. Terms are generally 10 weeks in length, and there are 4 of them. And if you want to send your kid to a private school, sometimes those terms might be slightly shorter, and obviously the holidays a bit longer. Kids don't need to be vaccinated to attend school, but they do need a record of vaccination, even if there's nothing on it. But if you want your kid to go to daycare in Australia, they are required to be vaccinated, so chances are they probably will have some vaccinations in them. If I've got this wrong, of course, please do tell me in the comments, as I love to read them and be told how wrong I am. You can homeschool your kid. Personally, I wouldn't, and I'm a teacher. All you need to do is register them with the Department of Education. Kids need to stay at school until they're 18 years old, but they can leave early if they meet certain vocational requirements, such as a full-time apprenticeship. Schools don't really fine you for taking days off. They're mainly annoyed if your kid has unexplained absences. But it isn't uncommon, particularly for younger kids, to be pulled out of school to go travelling, like a lap of Australia. Although generally they do get funnier the older your kid is, and particularly when it gets to assessment time. So don't get too worried here if you want to pull your kids out a few days early just to go to Disneyland. Most schools offer before and after childcare, and if you're a permanent resident, you'll still be entitled to childcare subsidy. So you'll continue to save up to 90% off the fee, depending on how much you earn. Another reason why you might want to go for permanent residency if you've got kids. One extra cost I have forgotten, some schools might ask for voluntary contributions. For my kid's school, that's $40 a year. I don't even know what for. There is also a cost if the kids go out on excursions, and the price of that will vary on what type of excursion it is. In the UK we call them trips. Languages in Australian schools are very different. It's not uncommon for them to learn Asian languages like Japanese or even Indonesian. But don't worry, they still do speak the European languages that we seem to be used to. They're just slightly less popular. Parents' evenings are called parent-teacher interviews, assemblies are called parades, and depending on where you live, the canteen might be called the tuck shop. Oh, and in Queensland, they call water fountains bubblers. Bloody weird. Remember the school year calculator down in the description. Thanks for watching to the end. And if you want even more help with your move to Australia, then watch this video. See you soon.